Let me begin with the premise of this teaching first. Works for a bona fide child of God is keeping the Ten Commandments. What we are uncovering here completely dismantles the standard baseline of modern religious thinking. It shatters the reflexive behavior of the typical believer who has never actually crossed over into being an authentic child of God. This is an absolute necessity if you are seeking real incorporation into the spiritual body of Christ. You must understand that this deeper reality is reserved strictly for those who have truly acquired Christ and been reborn, not for the institutional outer church or those who merely speak the words. This entire message is directed exclusively to those who have already transitioned from death into life. For hundreds of years, an immense theological blind spot has been maintained because early church history flattened 45 distinct Greek terms into a single, oversimplified concept called sin. Once the Latin Vulgate became the dominant spiritual text in the 4th century, the true depth of the Greek language was hidden away from the common person. By the time the scriptures were translated back from the Greek, centuries of systemic conditioning had already taken firm root, giving birth to massive theological debates that never existed in the minds of the apostles. To unpack this truth, you have to look at how the word for law functions in the original language. You have nomen, which explicitly denotes the written text of the Ten Commandments, and you have nomou, which points directly to an entire paradigm of belief. Christ did not come to meticulously validate the nomen, but he executed the nomou flawlessly. When the Gospels state that not an iota will pass from the law, they are specifically referencing nomou, the internal guiding principle of faith. Even the epistles show that when outsiders naturally follow the inner law of nomou, they become a guiding principle unto themselves without ever possessing the physical text of the nomen. This exposes the massive line of demarcation between the average churchgoer and a genuine child of God. The standard Jesus believer belongs to the called-out outer assembly, remains unregenerate, and is still fully bound to execute the Ten Commandments. For them, fulfilling the law through external actions is their mandated path. On the other side, an authentic child of God stands completely clear of the Ten Commandments because the divine principles have been written directly upon the fleshy tables of their heart. The institutional church is entirely incapable of explaining this because they cannot see past their own traditional indoctrination. They treat works as a vague category of extra good deeds or ancient dietary rituals. But when the New Testament repeatedly states that no one is justified by works, it is pointing squarely at the text carved into stone, the Ten Commandments, which Paul calls the ministry of death. The law of Moses operates on a system of performance, whereas the gospel operates on a system of absolute reliance. The moment you attempt to blend human performance with divine grace, grace is entirely neutralized. Here is the revolutionary truth that causes the religious mind to recoil. For an actual child of God, trying to keep the Ten Commandments is a sin of absolute unbelief. It is a state of internal self-reliance known in the Greek text as hamartias, which represents the mental mindset of the law itself. In Romans 6:16-23, this exact term is used to show that trusting your own obedience to the law as a source of righteousness pays out a single, devastating wage, spiritual death. In fact, under the revelation of James 1:9, the only sin that God actively forgives is this specific act of keeping the Ten Commandments, a cleanup measure available solely to a true child of God who has faltered back into legalistic dependence. Real salvation rests entirely on a supernatural gift of faith that does not originate from human willpower or personal choices. It is a permanent spiritual transformation that can never be reversed. This is precisely why the command to work out your salvation with fear and trembling is a fierce warning to guard your freedom. The ultimate danger is not moral failure, but the seductive trap of abandoning absolute reliance on Christ to step back under the jurisdiction of stone tablets. And for all who refuse this truth because of your indoctrination, I have only one thing to say. Learn Greek, or remain in your unbelief. Everyone is controlled by the disease of rejection unbelief. The translated Bible calls it sin. Rejection unbelief is a terminal, incurable progressive disease which causes you to reject the truth of God's sovereignty.